over the next 30 minutes, Jacob Morgan is going to share his insights on the modern employee experience and the key moments that define it. So in this session, we're going to discover strategies to leverage culture, technology, space for a lasting impact on employee engagement, leadership, and organizational success. As a reminder, this session will be recorded and shared with you over email. And so without further ado, I am handing it over to Jacob Morgan.
Thank you so much for having me. Very, very excited to be speaking with all of you today on a topic that I'm very, very passionate about, which is, of course, this theme of employee experience. And I'm actually working on a new employee experience book, which will come out next year. So I'm in the process right now of interviewing over 100 chief human resource and people officers at companies around the world. So I'm getting a lot of really interesting insights on what's happening now and also what's coming next in the realm of employee experience. And some of that is what I'm going to tease a little bit today, just to give you some insights around what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing from the various leaders that I'm talking to. So I think to set this stage, one of the things that I'm always really interested in is what is it that sets up some organizations from being different from the others? For example, if you look at the airline industry, you look at hotels, you look at pretty much any industry you want, there are always some companies in that industry which seem to have better customer experiences. Some companies which seem to out-innovate their competitors. Some which seem to have higher profitability. But they're in the same industry. They offer virtually the same type of product as their competitors. So what are they doing that sets them aside from their competitors, even though they have almost an identical product? They're in the same industry, it's almost the same company size, and they're serving the exact same customer, yet one company seems to be far away ahead than everybody else. And one of the things that I discovered as I was doing research on employee experience for my previous book on this, I came across a psychologist, a researcher by the name of Thomas Gilovich. And he did some really fascinating research on how our satisfaction is impacted depending on if we purchase a physical good or if we purchase an experience. So a physical good, for example, like this iPhone here. If you buy a physical good, what happens over time is your satisfaction goes down because you get used to it. You know, like I loved this new iPhone when I bought it, but it's been a year or two. And now, my satisfaction has gone down. I don't have that same level of excitement as I did when I first purchased it. And this is true across the board, regardless of what the product you buy. Your satisfaction over time will go down. However, if you purchase in an experience, what starts to happen is over time, your satisfaction goes up. And it's because you think about that experience, you share pictures, you talk about it, you reminisce. When you're with friends and family members, you share that experience. And so the more you think about it, the more you talk about it, the more memories you have from it, the more positively you tend to think about that experience. And what I realized is that the world's top companies, they approach their employee experience as if employees just purchased an experience instead of a transaction. So in other words, for a lot of companies right now, when you start working there, it's very transactional, right? You show up to work, you sign some paperwork, first day on the job, meet some people, go to a couple of meetings, blah, 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 blah. It feels very transactional. It's almost like you just bought an iPhone. But what if you could make it feel so that when employees are working with and for you, they feel like they just bought into an experience. And that's what the world's top organizations around the world are doing. And the challenge is that there's only very few companies in this space who are doing that. Now, one of the things that I was actually very pleasantly surprised by, when I first wrote about employee experience, the book came out in 2017. So it's 8 years ago, almost 8 years ago. By the time the new book comes out, it'll be 8-9 years. And if you look at where employee experience was in 2017 versus where it is now, we've seen a huge shift, a huge change. We're seeing organizations making very heavy investments in employee experience, which is, of course, fantastic. And we're seeing more people with the employee experience job title. We're seeing more organizations actually use the phrase and the terminology employee experience, not just internally, but also publicly. Whether you look at shareholder statements, whether you look at financial results, we're seeing companies talk about employee experience much more, which I think is very, very exciting. And time again, whenever I talk to business leaders, I still keep hearing that the number one business and talent trend going forward is employee experience. So I'm very reassured, and especially you can see kind of this big red arrow here. I think post pandemic, we really start to see more of a jump, more of an increase in this, and also in things related to employee experience, like employee engagement as well. But the fact that we're moving in such a rapid upward trajectory, I think is a great thing, not just for HR teams and organizations, but also for employees as well. So, how did we actually get to where we are now? And I think this is a very interesting evolution that we've seen. And we've been kind of pushing between employee engagement and experience, but I think now we're moving more from the engagement to the experience piece. So, we started off in utility. And utility used to be about just giving employees the bare bone essential tools they need to get their jobs done. A computer, a laptop, a desk, whatever it might be. It's just the bare bone essential tools that you need to get your job done. So you get hired, you're given your tools and resources, go. Don't bother me. Don't ask any questions. I don't care about engagement. Your well being is not a concern or a priority. I'm paying you, go do a job. That's what it was like. Then we moved into this world of productivity. And productivity was, well, you're doing your job, but how do I get you to be more productive, more efficient? How do you do these things faster, better? And there was actually a period of time where employees would be timed with stopwatches by their managers. And this was, obviously before laptops, before the internet, before computers, where employees were, for example, on an assembly line, and you would have managers who would literally stand behind them with a stopwatch, try to shave a couple seconds off of the length it took them to do a particular task. And even today, right, we still talk a lot about productivity, but we're always trying to get employees to do more with less, try to get them to be more efficient, more productive, faster. And that was a huge, huge concern, a huge priority, 60s, 70s, 80s, 50s. Then we moved into what I like to think of as this era of enlightenment when we think about corporate culture and employees. And that was the realm of employee engagement. And employee engagement was really about how do we make employees happy so that they can perform better? How do we make an employee smile when they show up to work? And this is where we started to invest in all sorts of programs. This is when we started to do free food and massages and hot yoga and anything and everything that you can think of. This is where the concept of flexible work was first introduced. This is where we created, in a sense, kind of like Pinocchio's Island for a lot of organizations. And we'll talk about the challenge of that in just a minute. And now I think we're kind of at that cusp between employee engagement and employee experience. And we're moving more into how do we create an environment where employees actually want to show up instead of need to show up. And it's not so much about how do we make employees happy, it's about how do we create an environment where we have a mutual exchange of value. And I have a lot that I can say about this. We'll leave a couple minutes at the end for Q&A if we want to talk about flexible work or anything like that. I'm very opinionated. I won't hold back. So ask me anything you want towards the end. But I think we're now in this world where we're realizing, hey, wait a minute. It's not just about engagement. It's about changing the core workplace practices of our company. It's about really making these deep changes to how work gets done. What does it mean to be an employee? What does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be an organization? What does it mean to work? And we're questioning these very basic fundamental things. And that, I think, is the core of what employee experience is all about. Now, I mentioned this idea of engagement and what a lot of companies have been doing. And I honestly really believe that we have gone too far. Whether we look at well-being programs and engagement programs, we've created an environment inside of a lot of companies around the world where we leave our workplace practices as they are, but then we sprinkle in all these things on top to distract employees from the reality of what it's like to work there. And the reason why this is a problem, and the way that this started is, employees, when they show up to work on day one, nobody ever says, oh, this place is terrible. They show up to work genuinely excited to be there, to make an impact and to make a difference. And then through outdated office politics and bureaucracy and hierarchy and you name it, their engagement, their satisfaction goes down. And then what do? We get together our HR teams and we say, hey, who has a good idea of how we can boost our employee engagement inside of our company? And then somebody raises their hand and they say, hey, why don't we give them hot yoga on Tuesdays? And somebody says, oh, that's a good idea. Let's give employees hot yoga. We give employees hot yoga, and guess what? Their satisfaction goes up. And then employees get used to it. And then they show up to work and they say, yeah, we're kind of used to hot yoga, right? The transaction, remember I talked about with the iPhone? And then they say, well, what else you got? And then we turn to HR and we say, hey, they don't care about hot yoga anymore. What else can we do? Somebody says, let's give them free food on Fridays. Great. We give them free food. Engagement goes back up again. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this. This is called the hedonic treadmill. In other words, we're not actually making any changes to the company, but really all we're doing is we're throwing these things on top so that when employees become unhappy, we can boost them with an adrenaline shot. It's like a stab to the arm. We give them this boost. They wake up a little bit, they get more engaged, then the adrenaline shot wears off and they get a little more down and blah, through the office politics and bureaucracy. Then we give them another shot and they wake up again. And this is a cycle that we see inside of our organizations. And I believe that we're actually doing too much. And I know this is going to be contrary to what you hear from a lot of people. Feel free to challenge me in the questions. I think we're doing too much with employee engagement programs, too much with well-being programs. There are a lot of books that have come out, whether you look at The Anxious Generation, whether you look at Bad Therapy. These are the names of the books by Abigail Schreier, Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist, and there have been several others. The challenge that we're starting to see, and we see this in our parenting, where we do too much for our kids. We outsource our parenting to therapists who are very quick to put kids on medication, very quick to diagnose kids, and we coddle kids. This is the challenge that a lot of parents are faced with today. And I think we're seeing this make its way inside of our organizations. We're seeing the same pattern make its way inside of our organizations where companies feel like they have to do everything and anything for their employees. We have to give them well-being. We have to give them financial training. We have to give them perks. We have to give them benefits. We have to give them credit to spend on whatever they want. We have to give them bonuses. We have to give them salary increases every year. We've ballooned and created these organizations that are no longer sustainable. And this is very consistent from a lot of the HR executives that I've been interviewing and speaking with. And it's really interesting because even if you look at Gallup, they have their Q12, the 12 questions that they ask. None of the questions that Gallup asks have anything to do with perks, with benefits, with well-being programs, with employee engagement programs. They ask questions like, are you being recognized for the work that you're doing? Are you connected to the mission and purpose of the organization? Are you doing what you do best on a regular basis? Do you have commitment to quality work? Is your leadership team talking about progress with you? These are all fundamental core aspects of work, and every single one of these 12 metrics that Gallup looks at have plummeted post-pandemic. Is there a correlation to that and the fact that so many of us are spending time working from home? We can talk about that and debate that, but I think there is a correlation there too. So in other words, what we're seeing is that employees fundamentally care about the core aspects of work, meaning give employees good pay, give them a leader who's going to be a coach and a mentor for them, give them advancement and growth opportunities, give them learning and training and development. If you do those things as the core, you will create an amazing employee experience. And the other stuff is just the icing on top of the cake. But instead, we're viewing the icing as the cake, and it's not proving to be a very effective strategy for organizations around the world. And I think a lot of the data actually reflects that. So the analogy that I like to think of here is employee engagement is changing the facade of the car. It's changing the paint, it's changing the tires, but employee experience, on the other hand, is actually changing the engine. That's what we need to spend more time doing, changing the engine inside of our organizations. And the way that this kind of plays out to ROI is that when you have employee experience, it's the experience of the employees that lead to an engaged workforce. And it's the engaged workforce that then leads to the ROI, the business outcome, the result. But a lot of companies are starting with employee engagement. That's the effect of something, not the cause. Changing the engine is the cause, employee engagement is the effect, and then we'll see the business value, which is the result. And I think more companies now are starting to move towards this realization. They're starting to make these investments. They're starting to ask these questions. They're starting to look at data and analytics, and they're questioning all the things that they've been doing over the past few years, which again, I think is a very, very healthy thing. Now, I mentioned that very few companies are in this employee experience world. Only 6% of companies are doing an amazing job 23% are very good. And then a lot of other organizations are kind of behind the curve. Some of the great organizations, you look at like a Microsoft, an Accenture, a Cisco, LinkedIn, I think is doing a good job as well. So there are a lot of organizations out there that have figured some of this stuff out, but there's still also tremendous room for improvement in this area as well. I also looked at how often do these best in class employee experience organizations appear on other lists. And regardless of the list that you look at, these companies appear on lists for employee happiness more often, smartest companies, best places to work, great places to work, top customer experience organizations, innovation. These companies appear on all these lists 2 times as often, 5 times as often, 10 times as often, 40 times as often. So there's clearly a very high correlation and relationship. We also see it when we think about ROI. So organizations that do an amazing job when it comes to employee experience, we see they have higher profit per employee, revenue per employee. They're smaller on average, which means they are more productive. So there's a lot that these organizations are doing, a lot that they have figured out. So very clear ROI here. And again, the core of employee experience is how do we create an environment, not where employees need to show up to work, which is what engagement has always been, to create an environment where employees genuinely want to show up to work. And this shift from need to want is what a lot of companies are struggling with. It's what a lot of leaders are having a hard time wrapping their minds around. And it's what I think the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years is going to be all about. So what exactly is employee experience? It really comes down to 3 things, 3 environments that your organization can control and design for and shape: culture, technology, and physical space. If there's anything that you remember from today, from my talk at least, I hope it's this: culture, technology, and physical space. That's what employee experience is all about. It is these 3 things. Physical space acts as a symbol for what your organization stands for and for what it represents. Physical space, whether we're looking at flexible work or showing up to the office, is a manifestation of your company's values. So if you think about all the values that your company has, if you show up to work, do you actually see those values manifested? So values: trust, do the right thing, innovation, put the customer first. If you show up to work, do you actually see this? If not, then those values are just words on paper. So physical space is a big part of the employee experience. It's the environment in which you work. And again, when we get to the Q&A, we can talk a little bit about flexible work in Q&A because I have lots of thoughts on that too. But physical space is an important part of the employee experience. And interestingly enough, I'm seeing a lot of organizations, they're actually making investments in this space. They're not just getting rid of their offices, they're creating new offices, they're investing in offices. So it's going to be interesting to see what the next few years of that will bring. Now, technology. Technology is exactly what it sounds like. It's the tools and resources you have access to do your job. And I think during the pandemic, companies made a huge investment in this space. Some companies already had things figured out, but a lot of the companies that didn't have these technologies in place, man, were they scrambling. They were having such a hard time trying to figure out which tools do we use, how do we set up the policies and frameworks. And this is, we saw the valuation of companies like Zoom skyrocket because all of a sudden companies turned to them and said, hey, we don't have anything. We need something like Zoom. And so technology is about the tools and resources employees to have access to do their jobs. How do they learn? How do they get access to training and development programs? If you're doing engagement surveys, what does that technology look like? The technology should be consumer grade, meaning it should be so beautiful and useful and valuable and easy to use that you wish you had something like that in your personal life to use as well. That's kind of how I like to think about technology. Do you have something like that exists? And the last piece is culture. Culture is how employees actually feel when they show up to do the work that they're doing. This is not something that you can necessarily see. For example, technology you can see, physical workspace you can see, corporate culture is how you feel. So how do the employees feel when they show up to work? This is where a lot of the engagement stuff is focused, where a lot of the employee experience stuff is focused. And interestingly enough, this is also the area where things like uh, the relationship you have with your leader, the purpose and the vision come into play, where the learning and growth and advancement opportunities. Are you doing challenging work? All of that stuff comes down to the corporate culture that your organization sets up. Corporate culture is the most important aspect of employee experience. It doesn't mean it's the only part of employee experience, but it is the most important part. Probably 50% of the overall employee experience goes to corporate culture, 30% probably technology, 20% physical space. So you can see that you need all three of these things, but the corporate culture is the thing that is the most impactful. Now, this is just kind of a little visual chart for you to take a look at, and I'll leave this up here for just a couple seconds. You can look at this and decide what kind of an organization do you think you work for. There are 9 categories of organizations I put together depending on where their strengths and weaknesses are when we look at culture, technology, and space. And if you want just kind of a quick little heuristic, a quick little algorithm for you to see what culture, what kind of a company you're a part of, this is what you can use for that. So for example, the very bottom, experiential, if you're doing amazing in all 3, you're part of an experiential company, one of the 6%. Inexperienced, you see 3 side faces. Struggle with culture, struggle with technology, struggle with space. It's inexperienced, and you can kind of go through that chart to see where you believe you fit in. And then you can also, we can talk about this again during the Q&A as well. I'm also very curious where a lot of people who are watching and attending believe their organization sits in this. So let's talk a little bit about where to start. Where do you begin to start to create a great employee experience for your organization and for your people? I think there are a few places you can begin. Number one, the most important thing. Remember what employee experience is: culture, technology, physical space. These are the 3 things that shape every employee experience for every single employee at every single company around the world. How employees feel working for you, the environments in which they work, the tools and resources they have access to actually do their jobs. That is what employee experience is fundamentally all about for everyone. Second, treat your organization like a laboratory, not like a factory. Laboratory, you experiment, you innovate, you try out new ideas, you use data, embrace failure. I can promise you, you will make so many mistakes when you go down this road. But that's part of what creating a great experience for your employees is all about. Things also change rapidly. Your workforce will change. Your employees will rotate. New things will come and go. New leaders will come into the organization. This is a never-ending journey. There's no such thing as we've created an amazing employee experience, we're done. Doesn't work like that. This is a never-ending journey, which means that you're constantly going to have to innovate and experiment. Look at what we're starting to see with things like ChatGPT and generative AI. How many HR teams and leaders out there are trying to figure out, what should we do with this? How do we experiment with this? What does this mean for our employees? And guess what? After generative AI and ChatGPT, there's going to be something else, and then something else, and then something else. Whether it's a policy, whether it's a law that goes into play, whether it's a technology, there's always going to be something. The only way that you can survive and thrive in that kind of an environment is if you think like a laboratory. You innovate, you experiment, and you test ideas. Next, focus on the moments that matter inside your organization. Moments that matter are the things that shape the experience for your employees. It's not just about the employee life cycle of attract, hire, nurture, retain. We're all familiar with that. This is about the moments that matter for your employees: the first day on the job, the first promotion, when an employee is let go or transitions out of the organization. All of these things are part of the moments that matter. And I like to think of 3 moments that matter. There are specific moments, like a first day on the job. There are ongoing moments, which are kind of like the relationship that you have with a leader. Or there are created moments, like fun events, hackathons, innovation challenges that you can create. So try to think about all the different ways that an employee interacts with your brand, with your organization, with your leader. There are probably hundreds of different moments. You can start with some of the big ones, like a first day on the job and a first promotion, first time an employee has a child or buys a house. Try to create those experiences around those moments, because they don't just have to be work related. They can also be personal moments as well. And I think that's a really good place for a lot of people to start. And if you can begin with these things of remembering the employee experience equation, culture times technology times physical space, and anytime your organization is making a strategic decision that impacts its people, run it through that equation of culture, technology, space. Think of your organization like a laboratory, not like a factory. And if you can embrace and implement this concept of moments that matter, I think you will very much be on your way to creating a great experience for your people. And if you want something even more, I put together actually a little training series for anybody that wants it. You can go to employeeexperiencetraining.com. I put together some fun videos where I dive into some of these topics in a little bit more detail. And then you can get those videos. You can also reach out to me as well if you have any questions. And my email here is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Happy to help in any way that I can. And I really fundamentally believe that employee experience is the next battleground for organizations around the world. I think there was a recent stat that came out that said by the time current graduates, there are 6% fewer jobs available to them than were the year before in 2023. So we're seeing a tighter labor market. It's getting harder to find a job. It's getting harder to find talent. The companies that invest in employee experience are going to be the ones that win this year and beyond. So thank you so much for having me. I hope this gave you some ideas and things that you can implement and try. And I think we have a couple of minutes for questions as well. So send over any questions my way. Happy to take a look at those and go through as many as we can.
Thank you so much, Jacob. I'll jump in with some of these questions that folks are sending over. The first question here is how do you assess the physical space for an org that is hybrid or mostly remote?
Yes. So in that kind of environment, the employee helps create and design some of their space. So in that situation, if it's a fully remote environment or a virtual environment, the employee then is responsible for the physical space in which they work. And we've actually seen during the pandemic, a lot of organizations were sending out these guides and kits for their employees, the best way to organize their space, how to be productive, the tools and technologies. They would send them these little kits. Well, now employees are responsible for that. Employees almost have to be kind of like their own IT teams if something goes wrong. Employees are responsible for creating spaces where when they get into their office or wherever they are, that they feel that sense of, I'm in work mode. I can be productive here. So a lot of that now falls into the hands of employees, but organizations can lend a little bit of guidance to that when and where it's needed.
That's great. Thank you, Jacob. I think probably one of the last questions here is, with the time we've got, what do you suggest doing when facing a leader who's not up for being vulnerable in the workplace?
Oh, okay. Leading with vulnerability. I love it. So if you have a leader who's not willing to be vulnerable at work, there's only so much you can do. You can always try to lead by example. And I won't get into the whole theme of the book, but I always advise employees and leaders, don't be vulnerable, lead with vulnerability. Vulnerability is about exposing a gap that you have. Leading with vulnerability is about exposing a gap that you have and demonstrating what you're trying to do to close the gap. How are you trying to become a better version of yourself? So if you work for a leader who's never acknowledging that they can get better, who's acknowledging that they have areas where they can improve, it's a very difficult leader to work with. So you can lead by example. You can try to have a conversation with this leader, but ultimately you need to decide if that's the type of a leader that you want to work with. Now, even if you have a leader who's not willing to do that, it doesn't mean that you can't do that. So if you're still a part of a team and you like the team that you're working with, you like your coworkers and your peers, you can lead with vulnerability amongst your team. However, it's very difficult to change the behavior of your leader. And so I think in that situation, it comes down to a personal choice. Is that the kind of a leader that you want to work with or not?
That's great. Well, Jacob, on behalf of everybody here at WorkLeap and the entire audience, a big thank you for this keynote presentation for us.
Thank you very much for having me.